Do I really have to read all this to play sorcery?
Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Hayne from Wizard's Den, and welcome to the first episode of How to Play Sorcery Contested Realm. In this first episode, I'll be giving an overview on how to play sorcery based on Rule 0.8 and skim over the very basics, just enough for you to get your first game started. Now, this episode is not going to cover everything. Sorcery is a complex game, and covering everything in a single episode is just way too much. I'll be covering more details on separate videos to keep this one short. The goal of this video series is to give you enough knowledge to play the 4-element pre-constructed decks without any issues. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Sorcery is a minimum 2-player game where you battle for the reign of the realm as an avatar by summoning minions, casting spells, and conjuring artifacts. Your ultimate goal is to defeat your opponent, which consists of 2 steps. Both you and your opponent starts at 20 life, and you will have to reduce your opponent's life to 0 first. This state, where any player is at 0 life, is called Death's Door. After putting your opponents at Death's Door, you must give a finishing strike to your enemy to claim your victory. The exact condition will be explained later, but remember that it will be a 2-step process. The battle will take place in a 5x4 square grid. As explained before, the first step is to decrease your opponent's life to 0. In order to do this, you must physically reach the opponent's avatars by paving the pathway to send your army of minions or yourself. To do this, you must place sites on the square grids. Sites allows you to physically travel through the realm, becomes a casting ground for minions and relics, and most importantly, it provides resources, both mana and mana threshold to cast various spells. To place a site, you will have to invoke your avatar's ability. All avatars possess an ability that reads tap, play, or draw a site. Tapping refers to an action to turn the card sideways in the clockwise direction. As long as your avatar is in an untapped state, you will be able to use this ability once during your turn. On your very first turn, where you have no sites in the realm, you need to place a site under where your avatar exists, which is in the middle of the bottom row. After that, you'll be able to place sites where you wish, following one simple restriction. You must place a site adjacent to your own sites. Adjacent refers to locations in the cardinal direction as shown in the image. After your first turn, these are the locations where you may place a site. Only one site is allowed to be placed on a single grid. You must claim your territory before your enemy does. As explained before, sites generate mana and elemental thresholds, which are the resources required to cast various spells. All sites generate 1 mana, and the amount of elemental threshold it produces is written in the bottom right corner. There are 4 elements in sorcery: fire, air, water, and earth. All spells excluding artifacts belong to one of these elements. Let's look at some cards, for example, and learn about the required cost for casting a spell. This card, called Raw Dromedary, requires 1 mana and 1 fire threshold. And this card, called Minor Explosion, requires 3 mana and 2 fire thresholds. Consider a condition where you have 2 red deserts, 1 cornerstone, and 1 standing stone. In total, it would generate 4 mana and 2 fire thresholds. It is possible to cast both of these spells, as the total mana and the maximum number of thresholds do not exceed what you have. A very important point to note is that thresholds are not consumed like mana. It does not add up. Regardless of what spells you cast, elemental thresholds are never lost. Now, if we take away a cornerstone, we would only be able to cast one of the spells, as now we do not have enough mana to cast both, even though we have the required threshold. In a different situation, where if we take away the red desert, we would only be able to cast the Raw Dromedary, as we do not have enough threshold for Minor Explosion. Now that we understand what the casting cost of a spell is, let's learn about how the actual casting is done for 4 different kinds of spells: minions, artifacts, auras, and magic. The first thing you must note is that all spells are cast through units that have the spellcaster ability. Your avatar is by default a spellcaster, and some minions have the ability spellcaster, like this apprentice wizard. This is an important notion as some spells have a range or direction restriction, and in such case the source of the spells become important. Now let's look at the first kind of spells, minions. Minions are important sources of damage and may only be cast on sites you own. When it is summoned, it will not be able to do anything that would involve tapping, such as moving, attacking, or use tapping abilities for this turn. It will be able to do all these after the turn it was summoned. This is called summoning sickness. Artifacts can be cast on the sites you own, or may be cast on the waiting hands of a minion you control anywhere in the realm. For example, you may cast this Drums of Doom directly to my raw dromedary on an enemy's site. Auras are cast between intersections of 4 squares where at least one of them have to include a site. In other words, you cannot cast an aura in a complete void. Note that this site does not have to be controlled by yourself, therefore making auras a powerful way to intrude your enemy's territory. Finally, magics. Magics are the only kind of spells that do not interplay like other spells. It resolves its effect and sent to the cemetery. Okay, so now that we know how to put all types of cards into play, let's learn how the game starts and progress. We first set up the realm as shown here. Both players place their avatars in the middle of the bottom row and place their spellbook and atlas decks on the sides after shuffling. Your spellbook deck should consist minimum of 40 cards and atlas decks should have a minimum of 20. Depending on the rarity of the card, there is a limit on the number of same cards allowed in the deck. 4 for ordinaries, 3 for exceptionals, 2 for elites, and 1 for uniques. Decide which player goes first in any fashion and draw the starting hand of 3 atlas and 3 spellbook cards. If you are not satisfied with your hand, you can take a mulligan. To take a mulligan, return any number of cards in your hand to the bottom of the respective decks, and redraw the same amount of cards again. You may take a mulligan only once per deck. Now we will go over the turn structure. Each player will take turns which consists of 3 separate phases: a start phase, a main phase, and an end phase. On the start phase, you will untap any tapped cards, and then you will draw a card from either your atlas or spellbook deck. Your choice. One note is that if you are the first player to take a turn, you skip the first draw in this first turn. Next, you will go into the main phase. In the main phase, you can cast a spell, activate an ability, move units, attack, and interact with artifacts. You may do any number of these activities as much as you are allowed to do so. To activate an ability, you simply pay the activation cost and resolve the effect. For example, all avatars have an activated ability that says, tap, play, or draw a site. In this example, tapping is the cost and playing or drawing a site is the effect. Artifact interaction involves dropping or picking up an artifact. Once per turn, a unit at rest can pick up or drop a relic at its location. However, a unit that has engaged in combat or used an activated ability of an artifact this turn cannot drop any artifacts. Units can move to adjacent locations. If a minion has airborne, it can move to nearby locations. Moving will cause the unit to be tapped out at the end of the movement. You may combine an attack sequence with a movement if you choose to do so. Attacking requires your unit to share the same location with either an enemy unit or a site you want to attack. You must tap your minion when declaring an attack. Your opponent can let the attack go through as is, or may decide to make additional units to defend or join the combat. Your opponent can declare defending the attacked unit with other untapped units on the same site or from an adjacent site. Defending will require the unit to tap. Note that when units from adjacent site joins combat, it must move to the site where the combat takes place. In the case where a unit is declared to defend the attacked unit, the declared defender will deal and take all the damage in combat. Also, instead of defending the attack, your opponent can choose to join the combat with the attacked unit. In this case, all the units declared to join the combat will deal and take damage. Once all blockers are declared, combat damage is assigned to all parties at once. The damage that a unit can deal is written on the top right corner of the card. This value also indicates the maximum damage it can take until it dies. If multiple blockers are present, the attacker divides the damage amongst the blockers. Both attackers and defenders exchange strikes and damage each other. If a minion takes damage, that damage remains until end of turn. If an avatar takes damage, the damage will persist throughout the game and be marked on the life counter as reduced life. When a site is attacked, the controller of the site will lose life equal to the power of the attacker. Note that this life loss is not considered as direct damage. After you are at a state where you cannot perform any more actions, you proceed to the end phase. You will remove all damage from minions and pass the turn to your opponent. So you take turns, deal damage, and you reach a point where opponent's life becomes 0. Your opponent doesn't lose the game instantly. At the moment it lost all its life, your opponent is at death's door. In the turn your opponent is placed at the death's door, it will receive immunity to further damage by any means until the end of turn. Only after this turn ends, it will lose its immunity and will be able to receive direct damage again. Any direct damage given after this short period of immunity is called the fatal blow. You will need to give this fatal blow to your opponent while it runs for safety and try to reduce your life before being killed. After you give your opponent the fatal blow, you can win and claim the reign of the realm.
So, that's it. That's the overview on how to play Sorcery Contested Realm. Remember, this is just an overview. I didn't cover all the details of the game in this video. I'll be covering other details in the following episodes in the future, so please check up on the updates. If you like this video and want to give support, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for future episodes regarding sorcery. Thanks for watching, and until next time, have a great game.